It took exactly 47 seconds. 47 seconds for Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem's entire defense to collapse on live television. One question, one iPad, one face on a screen calling from 7,000 miles away, and suddenly, the most powerful immigration enforcer in America was caught in a lie so blatant that even her Republican allies couldn't spin it away. December 11th, 2025. The House Committee on Homeland Security hearing room was packed beyond capacity. Cameras lined the back wall, their red recording lights glowing like warning signals. Reporters filled every available seat in the press gallery, sensing something explosive was brewing. They had been tracking whispers for days, rumors of dramatic revelations, of evidence that would expose the human cost of the Trump administration's deportation machine. At the witness table sat Kristi Noem, South Dakota's former governor turned DHS Secretary, the architect of President Trump's promise to deport millions. She looked composed, confident even, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her expression projecting the kind of certainty that comes from wielding immense federal power. Behind her sat a phalanx of DHS lawyers, their briefcases bulging with legal justifications and talking points designed to deflect any criticism of their hardline enforcement policies. But what Noem didn't know, what her entire legal team hadn't prepared for, was that Congressman Seth had been planning this moment for months. The Rhode Island Democrat had spent weeks coordinating with immigration attorneys, veterans advocates, and families torn apart by deportations. He had documentation, he had witnesses, and most devastatingly, he had a Purple Heart recipient on Zoom calling from Seoul, South Korea, a man who had taken 2 bullets for America and been rewarded with exile. The hearing had been routine for the first 3 hours. Republican members lobbed softball questions about border security statistics and praised Noem's tough-on-crime approach. Democratic members were critical but predictable, asking about due process violations and family separations. Noem navigated each exchange with practiced ease, delivering talking points about enforcing the law and removing criminals who don't belong here. But at 12:47 p.m. Eastern Time, when Seth Magaziner's turn arrived, the temperature in the room changed. "Madam Secretary," Magaziner began, his voice carrying the measured tone of someone about to spring a carefully constructed trap. "How many United States military veterans have you deported?" The question hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Veterans, not criminals, not gang members, not the worst of the worst that Trump and Noem constantly invoked to justify their policies. Veterans, Americans who had worn the uniform and sworn an oath. Noem didn't hesitate. Her answer was swift, confident, absolute. "Sir, we have not deported U.S. citizens or military veterans." It was a lie, a bold, unequivocal lie, and Magaziner was about to prove it. "I don't believe you served in the military. I haven't either," Magaziner continued, his voice gaining strength. "But I think you and I can agree, as Americans, we owe everything to those who have served our military in uniform, particularly those who have served in combat. Do you agree with that?" Noem nodded, probably thinking this was a setup for a generic patriotic exchange. "Yes, sir, I do." That's when Magaziner's aide appeared beside him, holding an iPad. The screen faced Noem, and on it was a face that would haunt her career. The face of a man she had just claimed didn't exist. "Madam Secretary, we are joined on Zoom by a gentleman named Sae Joon Park." The cameras zoomed in. The press gallery collectively leaned forward. Republican staffers exchanged nervous glances. "He is a United States Army combat veteran who was shot twice while serving our country in Panama in 1989. Park's face on the screen showed a man in his mid-50s, his expression a mixture of dignity and pain. From 7,000 miles away, he was witnessing the woman who had destroyed his American dream being confronted with the consequences of her policies. Magaziner's voice grew stronger, more prosecutorial. Like many veterans, he struggled with PTSD and substance abuse after his service. He was arrested in the 1990s for some minor drug offenses, nothing serious. He never hurt anyone besides himself, and he's been clean and sober for 14 years. The congressman paused, letting the facts sink in. A Purple Heart recipient, shot twice in combat, struggled with PTSD, a battle wound invisible but just as real as the scars on his back. Turned to drugs to silence the nightmares. Got clean. Stayed clean for over a decade. Earlier this year, you deported him to Korea, a country he hasn't lived in since he was 7 years old. The devastation of that single sentence rippled through the hearing room. 7 years old. Park had spent 48 years in America, the only home he truly knew, and now sat in a country whose written language he struggled to read, surrounded by relatives who were strangers. Will you join me in thanking Mr. Park for his service to our country? It should have been the easiest question in the world. A simple thank you to a man who had bled for the flag. But Noem's answer revealed everything about her administration's priorities. Sir, I'm grateful for every single person that has served our country and follows our laws. The conditional gratitude was stunning. Not, thank you for your service. Not acknowledgement of his sacrifice. Instead, a lecture about following laws, directed at a man who had taken 2 bullets while defending American interests abroad. Magaziner cut through her deflection like a prosecutor demolishing a hostile witness. Can you please tell Mr. Park why you deported him? Noem tried to continue her scripted response about law enforcement, but Magaziner talked over her, his voice rising with righteous anger. This man took 2 bullets for our country. You have broad authority, by the way, as Secretary, to issue humanitarian parole, to do deferred action. Will you commit to at least looking at Mr. Park's case to see if you can help him find a pathway back to this country that he sacrificed so much for? For a moment, Noem seemed to recognize she was trapped. The optics were catastrophic. A cabinet secretary refusing to help a Purple Heart veteran return to the country he had defended with his blood. I will absolutely look at his case, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Everyone in that room knew it was a political promise meant to survive the news cycle, not a genuine commitment. But Magaziner wasn't finished. He had more ammunition, more lives destroyed by Noem's policies, more proof that her claim of deporting only criminals was a fiction. Madam Secretary, I'd like to introduce you to another veteran. In the gallery behind Noem sat Jim Brown, a Gulf War veteran from Troy, Missouri. He stood as Magaziner gestured to him, his military bearing evident, despite the exhaustion etched on his face. Mr. Brown's wife, Donna Hughes-Brown, has been in your custody for the past 4 months, Magaziner explained. She came to this country legally when she was 11 years old. She's lived here for 48 years, and you're deporting her because 10 years ago she wrote 2 bad checks totaling $80. $80. A woman who had lived legally in America for nearly 5 decades, married to a veteran who had served in combat, was being torn from her family over $80 in bad checks from a decade ago. The absurdity, the cruelty, was impossible to ignore. Magaziner then recognized another man in the hearing room, the son of Narciso Barranco. Earlier that year, viral video had shown ICE agents punching the 61-year-old Barranco in the head during his arrest, even though he wasn't resisting. His son had served in the Marines. His other two sons were active duty Marines, and his father was being deported. "Madam Secretary, you promised America that you would go after the worst of the worst," Magaziner said, his voice trembling with control fury. "But these people are not the worst of the worst. A Purple Heart recipient, a military spouse, the father of 3 Marines." He paused, letting the examples accumulate in the minds of everyone watching. "There are many problems with your leadership, but the biggest problem is this. You don't seem to know how to tell the difference between the good guys and the bad guys." The accusation landed like a physical blow. Noem's face flushed red. Her jaw tightened. The carefully maintained composure cracked, revealing the anger beneath. But the damage was done. The 47 seconds from Magaziner's initial question to the moment Park's face appeared on that iPad screen had destroyed Noem's credibility. She had lied, demonstrably, publicly, under oath, and been caught in real time. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Within minutes, the video clip went viral. Noem caught lying about deported veterans trended on Twitter with over 100,000 mentions in the first hour. Cable news networks interrupted regular programming. CNN, MSNBC, even Fox News replayed the exchange, the image of Park's face on that iPad becoming the defining visual of Noem's failed testimony. But the most damaging revelation came hours later, when Congressman Seth of Massachusetts released a letter he had received from Noem months earlier, a letter that directly contradicted her sworn testimony. "Regarding your question on the number of veterans that have been removed since January 20th, 2025, ICE has removed 8 veterans." Noem had written on September 2nd, 8 veterans, not 0, 8 men who had served America, deported under her watch, and she had just told Congress under oath that none existed. The perjury implications were immediate and severe. Legal experts on cable news explained that lying to Congress carried criminal penalties. Former prosecutors noted that the contradiction was clear, documented, and impossible to explain away. Noem's office scrambled to issue clarifications. A DHS spokesperson released a statement claiming Park's extensive criminal history justified his removal, listing charges that sounded severe but dated back decades. Offenses committed during his darkest PTSD years before he got clean, before he rebuilt his life. But the American people had seen Park's face on that screen. They had heard his story. They understood that PTSD is a wound of war, that addiction is often how veterans try to survive the nightmares, that redemption should matter more than decades-old mistakes. Conservative media struggled to defend Noem. Even Tucker Carlson, typically a fierce Trump administration ally, opened his show with uncomfortable questions. "We send these men to war, they come home broken, and we throw them out of the country? How is that America first?" Religious conservatives were equally troubled. How could a party that claimed Christian values justify exiling a man who had literally taken bullets for his neighbors? Where was the mercy, the grace, the recognition of redemption? Within 72 hours, 3 Republican senators publicly called for Noem to review Park's case. Senator Susan Collins issued a statement. "If we cannot find a pathway home for a Purple Heart recipient, we have lost our way as a nation." Back in Seoul, Sae Joon Park watched the media coverage on his phone. His emotions a complicated mixture of validation and grief. The hearing had given him something he hadn't had in months: visibility, acknowledgement that what happened to him was wrong. But it didn't bring him home. He still woke up crying most mornings, the PTSD triggered by being ripped from the only country he knew. He still couldn't read the street signs. He still felt like a stranger in his own supposed homeland. "I just want people to know this is happening," Park told reporters, via video call. I'm not the only one. There are other veterans like me, forgotten, thrown away after we served. He was right. The congressional hearing had opened a floodgate. Veterans organizations across America began compiling cases. Dozens of men who had served honorably, struggled with PTSD, made mistakes, and been exiled rather than helped. The most heartbreaking case emerged from Georgia. Godfrey Wade, another Army veteran, had been sitting in an ICE detention center for 3 months, terrified he would be deported to Jamaica, a country he left as a child. Wade had served honorably, developed substance abuse issues linked to service-related trauma, and now faced permanent exile from the nation he had defended. His children, all American citizens, visited him through plexiglass barriers, unable to understand why their father, who had photos of himself in uniform, displayed proudly in their home, was being treated like a criminal. In California, Marine Corps veteran Miguel Santos faced deportation to Mexico, despite having served 2 tours in Iraq. His wife, also a veteran, had filed dozens of appeals, each one denied by DHS with form letter responses. Their 3 children, all under 10 years old, asked questions no parent should have to answer. Why doesn't America want daddy anymore? Didn't he do good things for the country? These weren't isolated cases. They represented a pattern, a systematic betrayal of the military to citizenship pathway that had been promised to thousands of immigrant service members. The Pentagon had actively recruited non-citizens with promises of expedited naturalization, enhanced VA benefits, and gratitude for their sacrifice. But under the Trump administration's hardline enforcement, those promises had become meaningless legal technicalities, easily discarded when veterans made mistakes navigating civilian life with untreated combat trauma. Park's attorney, Captain Michael Ramos of the Hawaii Air National Guard and a refugee law specialist, worked tirelessly to build his client's case for return. The legal arguments were compelling. Park had been honorably discharged. His offenses were directly linked to service-connected PTSD, and he had demonstrated 14 years of rehabilitation. But the bureaucratic machinery of deportation, once set in motion, proved nearly impossible to stop. The system treats veterans worse than it treats people who never contributed anything to this country, Ramos explained to reporters. Sae Joon took bullets for America. His reward is permanent exile. Meanwhile, people who committed far more serious crimes but happen to be citizens get second chances, third chances, endless chances. Where's the justice in that? The human cost extended beyond the deported veterans themselves. Jim Brown, the Gulf War veteran whose wife Donna faced deportation over $80 in decade-old bad checks, began speaking out publicly about the toll on military families. He described coming home from combat in Iraq, building a life with his wife over decades, raising children together, only to have ICE agents show up at their home before dawn, dragging Donna away while their grandchildren watched in terror. "I voted for Trump," Brown admitted in a viral interview that made him a reluctant progressive hero. "I believed he'd protect veterans and families. I was an idiot. This administration doesn't care about service. They care about deportation numbers, about looking tough. My wife has been here 48 years legally, and they're destroying our family over $80. $80. I've lost friends in combat who died protecting this country, and this is how America treats military families?" Brown's testimonial resonated because it came from someone who had supported Trump's immigration policies in theory, only to discover the cruelty embedded in their practical application. Conservative veterans groups, many of which had enthusiastically backed Trump's border security promises, began quietly questioning whether mass deportation was compatible with military values of loyalty and brotherhood. The political crisis deepened when active duty military members began speaking out anonymously about recruitment challenges. Non-citizen enlistees, who had historically been some of the most motivated and effective soldiers, were declining to renew contracts. Why risk your life for a country that might deport you later for a mistake made while battling PTSD? Why serve when support our troops was revealed as hollow rhetoric contradicted by actual policy? Pentagon officials privately warned the White House that veteran deportations were becoming a national security issue, undermining military readiness and troop morale. But those warnings were ignored. The administration's commitment to hitting daily deportation quotas took precedence over military effectiveness, institutional loyalty, or basic human decency. For Sae Joon Park, watching all this unfold from his small apartment in Seoul, the attention felt bittersweet. He appreciated magaziners' advocacy, the media coverage, the groundswell of public support, but none of it brought him home. He still couldn't see his children in person. He still missed his mother's funeral because travel restrictions prevented his return. He still felt the crushing weight of betrayal, the knowledge that his country had discarded him like trash after he had given it everything, including his blood. "Every morning I wake up crying," Park told a reporter in a follow-up interview weeks after the hearing. "I can't control it. The PTSD is worse now than it's been in years. Being ripped away from everything familiar, everyone I love, it's like being wounded all over again. Except this time, it wasn't enemy bullets. It was my own government pulling the trigger." The Kristi Noem hearing became a case study in the power of strategic congressional oversight. Seth Magaziner hadn't just asked questions. He had presented irrefutable human evidence. The iPad with Park's face wasn't a rhetorical device. It was a moral confrontation that no talking points could deflect. For Noem, December 11th marked the beginning of a political crisis that would define her tenure. She had claimed moral clarity, deporting only criminals, protecting only Americans. But when forced to look into the eyes of a Purple Heart recipient she had exiled, when confronted with an $80 bad check deportation of a veteran's wife, when shown video of ICE agents punching a Marine father, her claims of justice rang hollow. The 47 seconds that destroyed Kristi Noem's credibility proved something powerful. Sometimes the most effective weapon against institutional cruelty isn't statistics or policy arguments. Sometimes it's simply showing the human face of the damage, letting Americans see who their government is really targeting, and trusting that basic decency will prevail. Sae Joon Park took 2 bullets for America. His government thanked him with exile, but one congressman with an iPad ensured his sacrifice wouldn't be forgotten, and that the woman who deported him would be held accountable for every lie she told. In the end, the most patriotic act in that hearing room wasn't performed by the Secretary of Homeland Security sworn to protect the nation. It was performed by a Purple Heart recipient calling from Seoul, speaking truth to power from 7,000 miles away, reminding America what service and sacrifice really mean.